This National Forum on Police Crimes in response to the violence that is devastating our communities. 120 people were killed by the police in 2012. This year, we know 22 people have been murdered by the police. There were probably more because this winter in Chicago, there were murders by police that exceed that number. Why focus on police crimes when it seems things are out of control? Because police crimes are a large part of why things are out of control. Right. In the last 3 calendar years, Chicago police shot 167 people, 55 were killed, black people were 122 of them, Latinos were 24. This is according to the Independent Police Review Authority. Not a single police shooting was found to be unjustified except in the case of Rekia Boyd, where the police officer was charged, or I should say undercharged. In the overwhelming majority of cases, when the victim was committing no crime and had no weapon and posed no threat to anyone, the police were justified in shooting them according to the so-called Independent Police Review Authority. These statistics show that the police are targeting African Americans and Latinos. Howard Morgan was almost murdered by police for nothing more than driving while black in his own neighborhood. This is racial profiling. This is racism in the police department. But some of the officers who shoot these people were black themselves, it will be said. We say that doesn't matter. The problem is an attitude that is racist and the policy that is racist from the top down. And all police officers are bound by these policies, whether they be black or white. Police are supposed to serve and protect. This is the motto they have written on their vehicles. How do they serve and protect? When police feel they can shoot and kill people and never be called to account. When people are afraid to call for help because the police so often kill the people that they're supposed to be serving and protecting. When police have no regard for the rights of the people, especially black and Latinos. When police have no regard for the lives of people who are mentally ill or who suffer from certain mental disorders. When police continue to beat and arrest people for exercising their constitutional rights to protest. When police continue to torture confessions from suspects. When police who have been demonstrated to be torturers are rewarded with promotions and fat pensions. When police send agents, provocateurs into the movement of the people to frame and entrap community activists. When the police, in particular the FBI, profile, arrest, and even torture people of the Arab American and Islamic communities under the guise of terrorism. When the police are in alliance with gangs to divvy up cash and drugs and enforce gang control of territory, when some police shake down drug dealers and gangbangers in exchange for giving them free reign in the community. Is it any wonder that we have gangs fighting each other in the cities? The police often act as the biggest and baddest gang of all. That's how the police have been serving and protecting our communities for decades. That's the model they set. Just because the police operate as a racist institution, racially profiling entire communities does not mean that there are no white people victims of police and FBI repression. You will hear today from white people in our movement who have been victims. The reality is that when racism allows white people to think that the police are just fighting crime when they have license to kill in black and Latino communities, no one is safe in their rights. Essentially, racism is a lie, a pedestal for white supremacy. We capitulate to it if we divide the struggle along color lines. Our motto is black, brown, and white. Unite and fight the powers that be denying us our human rights.
All right. Hey.
We are having this forum to discuss in depth how and why the police are not serving and protecting our communities. We just know from a long and bitter experience as communities under siege that this is not what the police do. At least this is my perspective, but it may also be yours. Whether you share my ideas or not, we can agree that when the police shoot and kill someone who has committed no crime, that is murder. We can agree that when the police commit crimes, they should be criminally charged and punished and also held civilly liable. Can we agree on that?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Okay, let me talk about the purpose of this forum. The purpose of this forum, I ran it out of my notes, it means I have to think now. The purpose of this forum is to bring people together who have been engaged in struggles against police crimes throughout this country. We're not all on the same page. Some of us have been conducting the fight legally in the courts. Some of us have been conducting it in the streets. Some of us have been trying to get new laws passed. Some of us are dealing with particular situations in terms of the immigrant community and the detention camps and whatnot. So we call this forum so that we can get together and share our ideas and our experiences, and so we can explore the question of what we need to do in the way of united action. United action. United action would be in spite of whatever our political differences are. You know, we would see the problem as being so compelling that we can put down our political differences and unite and fight for the justice we know we deserve. We want you, when you go to your breakouts, to not only analyze the problem, discuss the problem, talk about the problem. We want you to inform us what you're doing about the problem, how you're conducting the struggle in your area, in your locality, you know. And then we're going to encourage you to make proposals as to how we should go forward from this forum. I'm not going to give any specific ideas right now because I'm going to keep an open mind. How we should go forward in this forum to build a national movement to stop police crimes. This is not a local issue, you know. The United States government is involved in this. Right. You know, this is a national and an international issue. We ought to fight it like that, you know. Trying to put out a lot of little local fires would be a long time, you know. So we need to think about how we can join together in a national movement that's really going to call attention to the shameful record of this government in protecting the rights of its citizens when it comes to the police. Okay?
Right.
Okay. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask Lennox Hines to come up. He doesn't need to be reintroduced. My brother in struggle. Come on, Lennox.
Thank you, Frank. I will be introducing our panelists from my chair. The panelists will come up to the podium and each will have 10 to 15 minutes. You do not have to take 15 minutes, but I will be cutting you off at 15. Hopefully, you will be able to say what you need to say in 10 minutes. The rest of the session will be reserved for our brothers and sisters, comrades in the audience, who will share experiences, put questions to the panelists, and then we will move to the afternoon sessions to deal with the breakout commissions. But before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to make some observations. When Frank, as I said to you earlier, called me and said to me on the phone that the Chicago Alliance was organizing this national forum on police crimes, I said, right on. Because it was 41 years ago that the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression raised the issue of police crimes. We raised it because then it was a national epidemic, and it still is a national epidemic today. The police in our society, democratic society, have unique power. They are the only governmental employees who, in the ordinary course of events, are legally permitted to use physical force, including deadly force, to compel us to obey. The police also are in a special category, in that they are sworn to obey the law at all times, on duty or off duty, in most jurisdictions in the United States. So their access to firearms are constant. The power of the state to kill exists not only after certain individuals are convicted of capital offenses, but police officers, as agents of the state, are free to kill anytime, on duty or off duty. They're free to kill individuals whom they suspect have committed an offense. Across the United States, more blacks and Latinos, Asian Americans, are victims of police shootings in every American city with a population of over 1 million. Police abuses is a fact of life in every minority community. If I walk out of this building and I'm running down the street, I do not have a lawyer stenciled on the back of my jacket. I may end up being a statistics. Police abuse is a fact of life in every minority community across the United States, and none of us are immune. We must prevent police executions of an accused who, if that person was convicted, might only receive probation. We must prevent executions of citizens whose only crime is being black, whose only crime is being Latino, whose only crime is being Asian, Native American, or being poor.
All right.
And who happen to be present when the police decide to overreact or make mistakes. Police mistakes can no longer be allowed to kill black children. Police mistakes can no longer be allowed to harm heads of households. Police mistakes can no longer be allowed to be justified by internal affairs procedures. We within our communities must make the police liable for criminal prosecutions as a result of their illegal acts of murder, false arrests, frame-ups, torture, as any ordinary citizen. Now, in my practice, I sue a lot of police. I sue them all around the United States. Insurance companies are ticked off and pissed off because I get a lot of money for victims. But that has not changed the epidemic. They write it off, the expenses. But today we are fortunate to have as members of this opening panel brothers and sisters whose expertise and concrete experiences from around the United States, here in Chicago, New York, Austin, Texas, LA, the Bay Area, and other areas, provide us with the opportunity to develop concrete strategies for combating police crimes and making the police accountable to our communities. So I would like to ask, as our first panelist, Brother Rob Warden, who is a founder and director of the Center on Wrongful Convictions at Northwestern University School of Law. Rob Warden's work was instrumental in leading to the abolition of the Illinois death penalty in 2011.
Yes.
He also serves, give him a round of applause. He also serves as a member of the Illinois Torture Inquiry and Relief Commission. So without further ado, let me invite Rob Warden to share with us his thoughts.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm very happy to be here. You know, I'm sure that many of you have heard, as I have heard many times, that the problems with police are that there are just a few bad apples, that the majority of them are just great people who are there to serve the public interest and invariably do the right thing. Well, let me tell you, that's not true. There is hardly a single police officer in the city of Chicago who is not, at very least, aware of serious misconduct, of police crimes, as it were. There may be a few, the ones who just came out of the police academy last week, maybe, but once you're in the department and you have been imbued with the normal traditions of the Chicago Police Department, and I'm quite sure this is the same in every large city department. I know it is in Philadelphia, Los Angeles, and New York, that you become part of the culture. And that culture is to deny, deny, deny. They commit perjury with impunity. They will not be prosecuted for the very worst crimes that they commit. And they will not be held personally accountable even if their actions have led to multi-million-dollar civil judgments against that we, the taxpayers, wind up paying. The officers themselves are never punished. And there is virtually no accountability. In Chicago, we have the Fraternal Order of Police. I think one of the primary functions of the Fraternal Order of Police is to prevent any chance of meaningful investigation of police misconduct. I don't know how it works in other cities, but the contract that the Chicago police have guarantee police who are suspected of wrongdoing of so many rights that are not accorded to the rest of the population that if they were accorded to everyone, we wouldn't have nobody in prison. Now, the whole array of police crimes. Obviously, the extrajudicial killings that you'll hear a lot about today are the worst example, but those are not the only police crimes we know about. I remember several years ago, those of you who are from Chicago will remember this, we had a citywide homicide commander named Joseph D. Leonardi. The citywide homicide commander was in charge of investigations not only of homicides, but also of any shooting involving a police officer. And he appeared at the scene in which an officer named Scanlon had been shot. They arrested a young African-American man, charged him with attempted murder of the police officer, and he was held in jail awaiting trial for more than a year. Whereupon it was revealed that, in fact, the shooting of Officer Scanlon had been Officer Scanlon's own fault. He was carrying an illegal weapon known as a pen gun. It had been in his front shirt pocket, and during a struggle, it had accidentally fired. Now, this is a homicide, or not a homicide, but a shooting investigated by the citywide homicide commander, Joseph D. Leonardi, famously known as Joe D., romanticized by the mainstream media. Not only, and he had covered this up for more than a year while an innocent man sat in jail. Now, while this happened, did Joe D. Leonardi ever pay any price? No. He was promoted to police superintendent. That's the kind of thing that we see. Now, when we talk about police crimes, of course, we know about the extrajudicial murders, and I'm not going to go too much into those. But we have a category of cases that I would call attempt murders by police. And you've all heard of the John Burge scandal. Torture, third world quality torture that went on routinely in a couple of police areas on the south side of Chicago where the population is virtually 100% African American. More than 100 people went to prison as a result of confessions that apparently were obtained under physical torture by John Burge and other officers working under him. This was brought to the attention of the Cook County State's Attorney, a man named Richard M. Daley, by the police superintendent, who had received a letter from a doctor at Cermak Hospital explaining that a man had been severely tortured. The man also was being prosecuted for capital murder by that time, and so the police superintendent wrote a letter to Daley, and it apparently was just totally ignored because absolutely nothing happened. Now, had he done the right thing at that point, the state's attorney of Cook County, we might have prevented all of this, the torture that went on that sent probably a dozen innocent people to death row. That's why I would call this attempt murder. But we have a false confession problem that goes beyond torture. Let me describe it. Well, let me show you tell you an example first. Just recently, within the last 2 years, a client represented by the Center on Wrongful Convictions was exonerated of a crime, a murder, a double murder that occurred in the uptown area of Chicago. He'd spent 20 years in prison for this murder, to which he had confessed, even though he could not have committed it because he was in police custody at the time it occurred. He'd been arrested for disorderly conduct, and he'd been held at the town hall district at the Halstead and Addison more than an hour before the murders occurred, and was there more than an hour after the murders occurred. And the police officers in charge of the lineup testified in court. The prosecutor argued that, police records can be wrong. What can't be wrong are the words out of the defendant's own mouth, his confession to this murder. Well, obviously, quite the contrary was true. There were 8 defendants originally in that case, so only 5 of them wound up being convicted. But all 8 of them confessed, and all 8 of the confessions implicated the person who couldn't have done it because he was in police custody. So here we have a really huge scandal. How did the police get 8 confessions to a murder, all false? How does that happen? Well, we haven't had any thorough investigation of it, but I know pretty well how it happens. The police arrest somebody, they bring him in, tell him, look, we don't really care about you. The person we really care about is X. If you will simply do this, we'll make it really easy on you. You can go home. You won't be implicated at all. Now, sometimes when people resist that, you're then threatened with, well, if you're not going to implicate him, we're going to put it all on you. And so after hours and hours of trickery, they will get an inculpatory statement, and then, of course, they will violate their promise by charging the person who just made it anyway, despite the promises that they'd made. Now, there are some things that we can do to prevent those kinds of false confessions. We've taken a major step here in the state of Illinois. Our legislature passed in late 2003 legislation that was sponsored by a state senator named Barack Obama, requiring the police to electronically record custodial interrogations in all homicide cases. Now, this is the whole interrogation from the point of the Miranda warning forward. And all of that time must be accounted for of people who were suspected of homicides. And our law, and this is the only law in the nation that does this, makes any confession that was not preceded by an electronically recorded custodial interrogation presumptively inadmissible in court. Now, that's a rebuttable presumption. It could be overcome, but if you could show, for instance, that the person said, well, I want to confess, but I don't want it to be recorded, maybe you could get that one in. We don't have any instances like that. I don't think anybody says that kind of thing. So we've got a very serious problem. As a result, Chicago has become infamous as the false confession capital of the world. Nationally, we've had about 1,325 documented exonerations since 1989. That's when we had the very first DNA exoneration. So we've been tracking them since 1989. More than 2/3 of the exonerations we've had since then have been a result of evidence other than DNA. Anyway, that's why they go back to 1989. And we have seen nationally that false confessions are responsible or are a factor in about 25% of documented wrongful conviction cases. In the city of Chicago, they're responsible for more than 50%. Now, sometimes these are not only confessions by the defendants themselves, but a confession by one defendant implicating others. We also have a major problem in that that recantations are just routinely rejected by the courts in almost every instance. And often we see cases where somebody years later will come forward and say, listen, I feel really bad about this. I was coerced by the police to provide this false testimony. Now I want to make it right. Well, our current state's attorney has just indicted a young man who did just that for perjury. And he's they've offered him a deal. If he'll plead guilty, he can have 3 years and he can get off for 3 years in prison. And she is arguing that his initial statement, made more than 20 years ago, it's pretty obvious that one of the 2 statements in this case that he made under oath had to be wrong. Either his testimony was the truth at the time of the trial or his recantation is the truth. One of them is a lie. In the state of Illinois, that can be prosecuted without proving which statement is the lie. And our current state's attorney has got a concerted effort to chill truthful recantations with this kind of prosecutions. This, to my knowledge, is the first case of this sort that has ever been brought. It would not be permitted under most state statutes. It would not be permitted under the federal bribery statute. They require that to prosecute on that theory, just that contradictory statements have been made, both statements be within the statute of limitations, which is typically 3 years. Here, our law will let somebody be prosecuted for perjury when a statement made 20 years ago is contradicted by later testimony. That is a way to chill and discourage truthful recantations. We need to do the opposite. It ought to be public policy to encourage, not discourage, truthful recantations. We have a long way to go here, and I'm sure in every city in America, to hold police and prosecutors more accountable. Well, more accountable. They're not held accountable at all at present. To hold them accountable for their myriad crimes. It's so glad to see so many people here who are eager to address this problem. And I want to thank you for inviting me.
Our next speaker is Brother Jeff Baker, President of the Committee for a Better Chicago, an active member of the Chicago Alliance Against Racist Political Repression, and a candidate for the Chicago City Council. Brother Baker.
Thank you for being so kind. Thank you guys for being so quiet. I know everybody is so quiet because you're all taking notes because we have a room full of people that came here to work, right? Right. Y'all didn't just come here to listen, but you came here to work. And that's exactly what we need in this movement. We need more people who are ready to work for their own freedom, for their own independence. And I know we have a room full of those people here today. Before I leave, I want to take your picture. I've never seen so many working people in one room. We're here today because we believe that violence perpetrated against the community affects the violence that goes on in the community. That's why I'm here. Do you believe that? So the police violence that is perpetrated against our children, against us as an adult, affects the stress and the violence and the retribution or retaliation that goes on within the community. It affects the relationship between the community and the police. It inspires this so-called don't snitch mentality, which helps to increase crime in our community. It makes it dangerous and unhealthy for those officers, that small percentage, that have just come in the academy and want to do right, who want to be protectors of the community. It makes it hard for them to do their job properly. So we are here today to share ideas, to share tactics on how we can prevent police criminals from increasing the violence in our communities, from killing our children, and getting away with murder. That's why we are here today. I'm here to talk about CPAC, which is say that again, an elected CPAC, which is a Civilian Police Accountability Committee. This CPAC is just one tactic in an overall strategy. And today you're going to hear about many strategies. You're going to hear about the Title VI and Department of Justice complaints, organizations and people that have used that strategy or that tactic to fight this problem. You're going to hear about demonstrations. People have demonstrated. UN reports. People have testified before the UN in hopes that the UN could give us national support in fighting, international support, pardon me, in fighting this problem. Civil disobedience. We have utilized that tactic as well. So we're here to share successes and hopefully incorporate them in our individual fights and to create a network of people that want to do work across the nation. CPAC's overall goal, the elected Civilian Police Accountability Committee, overall goal is to empower the people. How do you empower the people? You empower the people first by educating and informing the people, letting people know that this is what's going on. After you educate and inform them, you have to organize. After you organize comes the very important part of mobilizing people to action. And you have to be specific about that action. So we want to mobilize people to vote to get this CPAC enacted. We want to mobilize you to force your government to do what it is that you want and enact this Civilian Police Accountability Committee. What is this Civilian Police Accountability Committee? It gives everyday civilians like you and I, everyday victims / survivors of police crimes, the opportunity and the ability to have oversight over their police. Some of the things that it would empower the individuals elected to the board to do would be to choose the superintendent. Take that power out of the hands of the mayor and put it into the hands of the people. Take that power out of the hands of the mayor and put it back into the hands of the people. That is our power. It would also give us an opportunity to judge police misconduct the way that it was meant to be judged in their own rules and regulation, their own laws. Police misconduct is supposed to be judged by a preponderance of the evidence, which is a lesser standard than by reasonable doubt. Yet, most often, in the 90% range, these officers who commit misconduct go unpunished. We should have the power to decide when police have exhibited misconduct, and we should have the power to make sure that they are disciplined for such. And having that power may make an officer think twice before he pulls a trigger. Think twice before he harasses an individual walking down the street, before he takes a life before someone is tried. So, in short, we are here to do work. We are here to go to these breakout rooms, share our experiences, share our ideas, and become stronger in this fight against the oppression exhibited against our communities. So I hope everybody is taking notes and ready to get down to true business when we get into the breakouts. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, Brother Baker. Our next speaker would be Mohammed Sankari, who is a youth organizer for the Arab American Action Network. He has played a leading role in the revitalizing the youth leadership team of the AAAN, the Youth Labor Team, has been organizing in the Arab American community an anti-racial profiling campaign, demanding that the FBI ends its racial profiling of Arabs and Muslims. Brother Sankari.
I think that was the longest introduction I've ever received. So thank you all. Thank you, of course, to the National Committee Against Racist and Political Repression, and of course the Chicago chapter, who we're familiar with. I want to start by saying it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be here because I'm sharing the stage with some giants of the movement, people who are on the only top 10 list that I think matters, as well as people who are doing some real important work on the ground to change the conditions for our communities. It's a responsibility to be here because we need to speak for those who may have been victims, and we need to also facilitate the ability for those who can speak to speak as well. And it's a privilege to be here because I have the ability to stand here in front of you to talk this little piece. So I want to keep it as short as possible. That's why I'm pulling my phone out. I promise I won't be updating my Facebook status. So what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about the experience of the criminalization and the repression of the Arab, Muslim, South Asian communities in the United States. And I want to talk about it by telling you a story of my colleague, Rasmia Oda. Those who are interested to learn a little bit more, first of all, come to the workshop that myself and Joe Osbaker will be doing, and also check out our panel, or our flyers on the back table. So Rasmia is a Palestinian woman. She has been a community organizer, a fighter for justice her entire life. And when she was young in Palestine, she was arrested by the Israelis and put in prison and viciously tortured for 10 years. She was tortured into a false confession, which she has continued to deny. And we know that the Israeli court system is nothing but a kangaroo court. There's no justice for Palestinians who are arrested. So Rasmia, after escaping the brutality of the Israeli torture, eventually made her way to the United States in 1994. Rasmia continued to do her activism. She continued to organize in the Arab American community, and in 2006 moved to Chicago, where she now works with us at the Arab American Action Network. What kind of work does Rasmia do in our community? Well, she organized, built by herself in the old organizing techniques that some of you probably still know and do. You go door to door, house to house, family to family. She organized an Arab Women's Committee of 700 members, of women in the community to address issues that women in our community face, to educate them, to help them challenge some of the political dynamics that they face on the south side and southwest side of the city. In addition to that, Rasmia leads an ESL class. She works in citizenship. She oversees getting people needed services such as food stamps, medical cards, the Affordable Care Act, health insurance. This is the work that Rasmia Oda does. And this is the person who, on October 22nd of 2013, the FBI and Department of Homeland Security arrested her at her home. So, as I just stated, Rasmia came to this country in 1994, which is 20 years ago now. 20 years ago, Rasmia filled out a citizenship application to apply for citizenship. It was accepted. In 2006, Rasmia became a naturalized US citizen. No problems. And in 2013, October 22nd, she was arrested and charged with, quote, unlawful procurement of naturalization. What that means is that the government is alleging that she lied on an immigration application over 20 years ago. Now, I can say with confidence, Rasmiya does not lie. She has never lied about her past. She has never told any lies, and she has never hidden any part of her life. This is nothing but another trumped-up charge by the federal government that comes after the Arab and Muslim communities, specifically leaders in those communities who organize to challenge the systems of oppression within the United States and to challenge the systems of oppression based on United States foreign policy. So what's going to happen, or what can happen? Well, Rasmiya is facing 10 years in federal prison and an immediate revocation of her citizenship and deportation out of the United States. Again, this is a woman who, maybe she'd be mad at me saying this, but her 67th birthday is coming up soon. It's a woman who is a survivor of brutal Israeli torture. And this is a woman who is an icon and a leader in the community. Why would the United States government want to come after her? So let's think about it. Why would the United States government want to come after her? Well, we see a pattern in the Arab and Muslim communities that those who challenge specifically foreign policy related to the national liberation of Palestine, those who are supporters of the national liberation of Palestine, those who challenge US wars abroad, they are targeted and they are taken down in a systematic assault against these communities. It is not new. I don't have to tell the people in this room that the FBI and the local police and all levels of the United States law enforcement attack, defame, assassinate leaders of communities that are fighting back against the government. So that's one thing. We know that from history, right? It has absolutely nothing to do with one community or another, right? It happens to all communities. That's one piece. The second piece is that the United States has and is involved in what we call a war on terrorism. Well, what is the face of terrorism in the United States? What is the face of terror of American foreign policy? Who are the terrorists, right? And when you have a war on terror and you have a face to terrorism, then you have to produce terrorists to show that you are doing something, right? And so young Arab and Muslim and South Asian men and women are being entrapped with false, trumped-up terrorism charges so that the United States government can say, we are doing the work. We are stopping terrorism. We have to stay vigilant in Iraq. We have to stay vigilant in Afghanistan. We have to keep drone bombing Yemen. We have to keep drone bombing Somalia. We have to enforce AFRICOMS, a new US base across the entire African continent. We have to support the Israeli military, because if we do not, look what's going to happen. These people, these terrorists, they will be in our own backyard. These are nothing but fabricated, trumped up charges that the United States government has a long, long, long history of committing and continuing to commit. And now we see that the Arab and Muslim and South Asian communities have become a victim of these sorts of practices. So to return to Rasmiya, on June 10th of next month in Detroit, her trial begins. This is the trial that will determine if she will be able to return to her family, to her community, to continue doing the work that she does, or if she will be sent to a federal prison for 10 years, and when she is 77 years old, deported out of the United States. So, for those who are interested in getting more involved in Rasmiya's case, along with exploring these issues further, a little plug for our workshop, and check out our flyers in the back. And I want to end it on this. Why Rasmiya? Or why any of the political prisoners? Right? We have learned, myself being I can call myself a young person still. We have learned from history, from studying history, that when you defend political prisoners, you're defending the movement. When you defend a Palestinian political prisoner, you are defending the national liberation of Palestine. When they criminalize Palestinians, it's a criminalization of the movement. When they criminalized, past tense, the Chicano movement and the Black liberation movement and the indigenous liberation movement in this country, and all of the other social movements, I'm leaving hundreds out. When they criminalized leaders and members of those movements, a defense of those political prisoners is a defense of those movements. And the other piece that I want to bring is that we understand, our community and the organizers in our community understand that there is a serious material difference in the way that we experience police repression and police oppression than other communities in the United States, but they're connected. Mass incarceration in this country, which affects predominantly blacks and Latinos, is connected to the repression of the small Arab, Muslim, and South Asian population of this country. How? Because the policies that are enacted to combat so-called terrorism and for national security are the same policies that allow militarized police in the Black and Latino communities. The police have military-grade weapons because of national security clauses. The police, the Chicago police, do not use military-grade weapons in mass against Arab and Muslim communities that are the face of terrorism. They use it to police, quote unquote, the communities of the Black and Latino and Puerto Rican communities in Chicago. So that's the connection. When we say that we're fighting racial profiling, and we're fighting the oppression, and we're fighting these policies that affect the Arab and Muslim communities and the Palestinian communities, we also are doing it with the analysis and knowing that when we fight against terrorism policies and national security policies, these have real material benefits for all communities. And so I'm standing here to say that, as Mr. Chapman said so well before, I understand and we understand that a material gain for the Black and Latino community vis-a-vis criminalization and repression is a material gain for the Arab and Muslim and South Asian communities. And a material gain in stopping terrorism laws and the militarization of police and the militarization of the border is a material gain for the experiences of the Black and Latino communities that are facing mass incarceration, as I'm sure more people are going to talk about on this panel. So thank you very much. I'll be available after the panel if folks want to chat a little bit, and you can also check out our breakout session.
Thank you very much, Brother Sankari. Our next speaker is Bernadine Dawn, retired Director of Children and Family. Retired Director for Children and Family of the Justice Center, Northwestern University. She has been and continues to be an activist, an organizer, clinical professor of law and lecturer, University of Chicago Human Rights Program, and on the FBI's list. On the list that we're all on. Bernadine Dawn.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I, too, am starting my timer here. I think it's very important to have a conference that focuses on police violence, and I'm very honored to be here as a part of the beginning of that discussion for the next 2 days. I thought I'd begin with an example of what I call Chicago's stop and frisk behavior, because we haven't kind of branded it the way New York did. But I'm going to give you one important example. Despite an ordinance that allows the Chicago Police Department to issue tickets for small amounts of marijuana possession, which has been in effect for a couple of years, this behavior is going on. That ordinance allowed the police the discretion to simply give people a ticket for small amounts of marijuana rather than putting them into the criminal justice system. But in fact, since that ordinance went into effect, 20,000 Chicagoans have been arrested for possession of small amounts of marijuana, 95% of them African American and Latino. This amounts to an extraordinary set of consequences, right? Time in jail, loss of jobs, loss of housing, a permanent record, or even if the charges are ultimately dismissed, all of that on your arrest record. In effect, the new ordinance really was an ordinance that said it's okay for white kids to possess marijuana, but not kids of color and not people of color in the city of Chicago. That seems to me to exemplify what I've seen in my 72 years of Chicago policing. In addition to the Chicago Police Department, which I'll get to in a minute, I want to point out that law enforcement in Cook County includes the state's attorney, as has been mentioned, and Cook County Jail. Because overcharging by the state's attorney is common behavior, it's institutionalized practice, both in juvenile court and in adult criminal court, overcharging. And because Cook County Jail is so overcrowded and wretched, it passed, as I think many of you know, 10,000 people caged just 2 miles from here, right in the middle of the city of Chicago, 95% African American and Latino people. Because the jail is so overcrowded, simply charging people leads to enormous pressure to accept a plea deal and to be released from that hideous place of incarceration that has such terrible consequences. So it's part of the routine and institutionalization, I believe, that whole process of Cook County Jail being in this kind of a situation, the institutionalized criminalization of young African American and Latinos. There's a new class action lawsuit against Cook County Jail by the MacArthur Justice Center at Northwestern that alleges a culture of lawlessness, violence, sadistic, cruel, and sometimes racist and homophobic behavior by the guards. It's called an ongoing bloodbath. This lawsuit alleges that the county writes off the violence by guards at the jail with monetary settlement once the bones are broken, rather than shrinking Cook County Jail down to a tiny necessary size that it might have to be. I don't know, 2 people, 10 people, 20 people, what do you think? We should start way down and then work our way up about what's necessary. So therefore, the county has paid $9 million over the last 3 years to settle 250 civil rights lawsuits stemming from jail abuse, rather than getting to the underlying issues, dealing with the overcrowding in very simple ways, not overcharging, and having a much shrunken system. We have a county board president who has identified this overcrowding as a major crisis. So I think it's an opportunity right now for us to actually move on this in a very serious way and pressure in a grassroots way people who were most affected by the jail. And you know, if anybody's tried to ever visit somebody at the jail, you just have a sense of how wretched it is for children, for families, for grandparents, for everyone. So I think one of our major campaigns must be to dismember that massive institution. It's 11 different institutions and wardens on the west side of Chicago, near west side of Chicago. Chicago Police Department, I just thought I'd run by a few statistics here. It's the 2nd largest law enforcement agency in the United States after New York, with over 12,244 sworn officers and 1,900 other employees, all under the jurisdiction of Mayor Rahm Emanuel. Of the police officers, now led by Superintendent Gary McCarthy, who, by the way, is the highest paid city employee. Isn't that interesting? It's like the highest paid coaches at coaches are the highest paid people at universities. In the city of Chicago, the highest paid person is the superintendent of police, with an annual salary of $260,000. So of the police officers, 70% are male, 49% are white, 29% are African American, 19% are Latino. And I thought it was interesting, I'm not sure what to make of it, but that officers begin with a starting salary of $43,000, which jumps within 18 months to $65,000. But that, of course, does not describe the real situation. Our Mayor Emanuel set aside $71 million for police overtime pay for 2014, up from the $32 million he had budgeted the previous year. So he doubled the amount of overtime pay. In all, his proposed police department budget, Emanuel's for 2014, not proposed, accepted budget, is $1.29 billion, significantly up from the department's $1.25 billion in 2013. So we have this massive amount of money being spent on policing and being spent on caging here, right? Much of it not about violence prevention, not about making the communities safer. There's a long history, as old people here know, or older people, of Chicago violence, police department violence scandals. I'll just mention a few of them. Somerdale, 1960, the Democratic National Convention, 1968, the assassination of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark of the Black Panther Party, 1969. And of course, the 2-decade-long reign of torture of African Americans in Area 2 and Area 3 police districts under Commander John Burge. You know, the story of John Burge has been mentioned before, and it's such an extraordinary story that I'm just going to say 2 quick things about it. Although one could say that by the early 90s in Chicago, everyone involved in law enforcement and everyone who practiced at Cook County Jail, or Cook County Courts, in the Cook County Courts, and everybody in Cook County Jail, and everyone in death row, I've learned this in part from Rob, everyone knew that something was wrong with these the only murder case after murder case coming out of these area police stations, where the only evidence was confession, a tortured confession. Everyone knew that there was something wrong with this, right? And everyone knew to the point where, after the letter Rob described, John Burge was forced out of the police department in 1993. But how was he forced out? And why did it take another almost 2 decades to get him put in prison? I think that shows something about the Chicago Police Department and what we have here. He retired in 1993 on a full police pension, which we pay for, right? That's our money going to his full police pension. Now, I believe in pensions. I'm a strong union girl. I believe in pensions. He was pushed off for misbehavior. He lived on a boat in Florida called what? The Vigilante. Does that resonate with the history of racism in the United States? Until he was charged with perjury and obstruction of justice in federal court in 2008. There was no criminal charges against him whatsoever. And I believe that those charges in part came from the massive organizing that went on for those 15 years in the African American community here, the organizing of mothers and sisters and family members who visited the people on death row, the massive emptying of death row, the campaigning by the People's Law Office and others about police torture, and a few key journalists who wouldn't let it stop being on the front pages of the Chicago papers. But because of that, and because I think, interestingly enough, we finally had the wits to send people from Chicago to Geneva to meet with international human rights committees who wrote in their report, for example, the Committee Against Torture wrote in its 2008 report 3 paragraphs to the United States federal government, insisting that they investigate 3 things. 1, the killing at Abu Ghraib, the torture and killings at Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. 2, the torture going on at Area 2 and Area 3 police stations under John Burge in Chicago. And 3, the torture at Guantanamo. We found ourselves between these 2 highly documented examples of United States condoning of torture. And that, I think, led to finally to the federal indictment, that and a lot of organizing behind the scenes, to the federal indictment against John Burge. Finally convicted of all charges in 2010, he was sentenced to the maximum possible sentence for those puny little charges which he was charged with, of 4.5 years, and entered prison in January 2012. So that whole saga is important partly because of the ballad of John Burge, but really about how long and how hard we had to fight to get him convicted and put behind jail. I want to mention 3 or 4 quick things that are still underway. One is there's a new lawsuit by Jamie Calvin here in Hyde Park on making public all of the complaints that are made about police misconduct. As you know, you can't find them. You can't find out where they are. You can't find out which police have already been charged with misconduct. And this, an appellate court just held that this has to be made public by the Chicago Police Department. We'll see, but it's going to take a campaign on our part to make it happen. This follows a study by University of Chicago law professor Craig Futterman, who found that of the 19,000 complaints accusing police officers of excessive force, illegal searches, racial abuse, sexual abuse, and false arrest, of these 19,000, just 18 led to a police suspension of a week or more. So these go into, you know, what they call the circular file, right? They go into the garbage can as soon as they're filed. So in more than 85% of those 19,000 cases, the accused officer was never even interviewed. So that's why we need a real, viable, citizen-based, open and transparent series of complaints so we can see which police officers get the complaints the most so that we can force a mechanism to make it work. I want to also highlight the work by Krista Noel and the Women's All-Point Bulletin here in Chicago, which focuses on police violence toward women, particularly sexual violence towards women. This, like violence in the military, I believe has been invisible by and large to the community, to the public, and certainly in terms of convictions and prosecutions, and I urge you to look toward her work. She also just got comments by the UN Human Rights Committee in Geneva requiring the federal government to look into this, the Chicago police. I also want to note the remarkable and brilliant series called Historical Moments of Policing Violence and Resistance, done by Miriam Kaba, Project NIA, and the young people who work on the North Side with Project NIA. You can find this online. It's 8 pamphlets, illustrated, graphic illustrations by young people about Chicago police violence history, including the Mississippi Black Papers, police violence in Harlem, not just Chicago, the Oscar Grant shooting, and so on, of these 8 fantastic, nationally important things. 3 of them are from Chicago, the last 3 volumes, 6, 7, and 8. One is about Chicago Red Summer 1919. That's a bit of historical importance. The 1968 Democratic National Convention and the John Burge Chicago police torture scandals. For the last 40 years, I've been fighting primarily to unravel harsh criminalization of youth, along with the big network of people here in Chicago and nationally. And I just want to tick off 5 things that we have done. One is we successfully ended the juvenile death penalty. It's unbelievable that that was something we had to do. The United States was the last country in the world legally executing children under the age of 18. Well, they weren't under the age of 18 when they were executed, but for crimes committed under the age of 18. So we had to put that to rest and get that out of the way. There's been a dramatic reduction nationally in the caging and the incarceration of children, of juveniles, of youth. And I think that's an important trend to realize. We're in a moment, it's been 20 years now, a long moment of declining crime rates. And it's important for us to act during these periods of time because why would incarceration go up during a period of declining crime rates, right? They claim that that's causal. There's no evidence that that's true, or if it's true, it doesn't account for the dramatic differences. So I think it's important that we continue to press. We've closed 2 juvenile prisons here in Illinois, and 1 supermax prison. TAMS, it's important for us to move on to do more of that. We should be doing 3 a year because it's not necessary for public safety to have the numbers of people, juvenile and adults, incarcerated the way we are. We can have imaginative ideas about sanctioning dangerous behavior other than prisons. If we just sat here for 2 hours and brainstormed, I think we'd come up with lots of ideas. So let's keep closing prisons. We also, in the course of that, must continually challenge the racial disproportion in arrests, prosecutions, convictions, and incarceration. You've all seen the charts. We have 2 systems of youth justice in the United States, as well as adult justice, one for privileged white kids and kids who live in certain zip codes, and a different one punishing pain, agony, and the disruption of a productive future for kids of color, and that has to end. And here I would point you to the Burns Institute. Google them, look them up on the web. You'll see it's a great, great national organization focused particularly on racial disproportion of juveniles. Last, I want to note that, well, 2 last things. One is we've been working for the last 6 years to abolish the most extreme sentences for kids. The most extreme is juvenile life without possibility of parole, which is a mouthful. But it means that you're sentenced to die in prison. Never, 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 no matter who you become, how much you mature, would you ever even be able to argue for release. Okay? That's an incredible sentence. No one else in the world has it, only the United States. And so we have some victories, 2 Supreme Court victories, 1 Illinois Supreme Court unanimous victory, but those people are still in prison, and we have to get them meaningful, periodic reviews of their sentences and meaningful opportunities for release. So I want to do 2 last things. One, we can abolish, I think, in the next few years, trying children as adults. It's, again, only 1 other country in the world does this. It's an absolutely brutal and inhumane policy. Children should be in juvenile court. The juvenile court was invented here 110 years ago for that reason, and we should return kids to juvenile court, not trying them in adult court, and not pretending that for the purposes of crime, but not for the purposes of anything else, that they're adults. And one other key to that, I think my last point will be gangs. When all else fails, the Chicago police always resort to talking about gangs. And I think, I can't remember which of you gentlemen said, the biggest gang in Chicago, it's a known secret who the biggest gang in Chicago is, and it's armed and legal. So we must clear the ground and start talking about gangs in a reasonable way. Of course there are drug cartels. Of course weapons flow into Chicago and get into the hands of kids through organized mechanisms. But kids don't manufacture guns, and kids aren't making the profit off of this. And we must be able to find ways to insist that we can have safe communities through development, through growth, through opportunities, through not closing schools in those communities, and not the idea that the solution to every shooting is more police in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernadine Dawn. Our next speaker is Brother Nelson Linder, President of the NAACP Austin, Texas chapter, and he will speak about the work of his organization in fighting police crimes. Please welcome Brother Nelson Linder.
Thank you very much. I too want to thank Mr. Chapman for the work in organizing this very important conference. I also want to thank you for being a part of this conference. I want to take a moment and talk about something that's very special. I was talking to Brother Jeff earlier about Austin, Texas, and I think there are 2 folks here today that might be Judge Yvonne Williams, possibly, and maybe Susan Richardson. Judge Williams flew in from Austin to attend this conference. I think that's pretty important. We're a long way from Chicago. When I talk about police matters, let me talk about it from a standpoint of being only drown every day in a place called Austin, Texas. My office is about half a mile from Rick Perry's office. That's a metaphor, if you can imagine that. Here's what's important. Last week this time, I was in a place called Hearn, Texas. Anybody ever heard of Hearn, Texas? Last week, a 93-year-old black woman was shot 3 times by a police officer after an initial call about a disturbance. Wow. 93 years old. Now, I'm not in Hearn, Texas. I'm about 2-hour drive. I was called, went down, did an investigation, looked at the circumstances, and the officer was fired last Saturday by the Hearn City Council. That's both good and bad news. Here's the bad news. Hearn, Texas has 4,600 people. Very small town. In the past 3 years, there have been 2 shootings there by the same officer of 2 black people. Here's my point. Think about an analogy of a baseball field. A baseball field has an infield. If you have a very good infield, you can stop most ground balls. This cop should not have been hired in here in Texas. He was fired from another city next door for abusing people. And my point is going to be, if we pay attention as local people, oftentimes we can stop this stuff before it ever occurs. This guy was hired by the city council, and many folks, just like me in that town, sit down and looked at it and did no research. And where I come from, oftentimes you have access to police officers' background, their records, and those kind of things. You need to know who are hiring these people, where they come from, how they conduct themselves to make sure you can prevent some of this stuff. Now, here's the other bad thing about what happened here in Texas. Anytime somebody that old is shot and killed, it's a stain on all of us. On all of us. We bear that burden. The other thing is, although he was fired last week, he's going to go through a grand jury here in Texas, led by a DA. And they're going to put out a thing called the Texas State Penal Code. And all of us have penal codes, right? It's pretty self-explanatory. And they're going to talk about a police officer's right to be objective and reasonable, although oftentimes they are subjective and unreasonable. And so when he goes to court, there's a very good possibility he's going to probably stay terminated, but no charges will be filed. And therein lies our problem. And so as local folks, we have a major job on our hands. For example, in Austin, Texas, I'm going to address the Title VI complaint later. We talk about oversight, but it's more than just oversight of the police. It's oversight of the DA's office that doesn't get prosecutions. I'm going to address that. It's oversight of state officials who don't address the antiquated slavery-based penal codes. It's oversight of the entire system, and it starts at a local level. Let me tell you why this is so important. When I left town this week, we got an indictment for the first time in 12 years in Austin, but that's good news because in Dallas, they've had 2 in 40 years. Houston, 1 in 40 years. Nobody's being indicted.
Right.
Yet we have all these shootings and these huge racial disparities. I wonder why. Well, they told us why in the American Statesman last week. Here's what they said. They said that grand juries tend to back cops. Grand juries tend to back cops, rarely indict them in police shootings. Well, why is that? Well, because when DAs take these police cases, they use a very different process than they use for civilian cases. If I committed a crime, I'm going to go through a process and probably be indicted 95% of the time. But we found out in this article, and they said it in writing, when a cop commits a crime, they go through a special process. And in that special process, it allows them almost immunity from prosecution. But we let it happen. Now, in this article, you've got the Travis County DA, Rosemary Lindbergh, talking about her sympathy for cops and how human cops are. Well, all of us are human. All of us make mistakes. But there is no sympathy for the victims. So we have to be perfect. They can be imperfect, and they're not going to jail. But let me tell you folks what they really fear. Because see, at a local level, you have to have a very good defense system. That's why I mentioned the baseball analogy. If we catch this stuff at the point of impact, we can stop it. For example, in my office, when there's a shooting, I'm notified 99% of the time. That means while they do their thing, their investigation or so-called investigation, I'm also doing mine. And if I get evidence that's strong enough, we can get them fired before they get to first base. If we blow it, they get to first base, then second base, and pretty soon we're in trouble. So we can mobilize and address these shootings ourselves in a formal, respectful way. Now, here's the second thing. Once it goes through internal affairs, and every city is a little bit different, they give it to the DA's office. Now, in Austin, Texas, and Travis County, those are elected officials. That means oftentimes we vote in big numbers, we can get these guys out of office, and we can force them to address why is it you don't indict police officers despite all these racial disparities and the crimes we know that they commit. They very seldom pay a price for doing this kind of nonsense. You know why? Because unions there, I'm sure like unions here, are very strong. Police unions run the city of Austin, run the state of Texas, for the most part. So they have a monopoly on political power most of the time. We have to understand that. So when I look at these issues on a local level, our first understanding is look at the process and see what your power is and what you can do to address these things. And we are never hopeless or never powerless. But oftentimes we don't use our resources to the best of our advantage. Now in Austin, Texas, we have a thing called a police monitor that we created in 2002. Does not have subpoena power, but it do shine lights on police shootings. So when there's a shooting, we have a forum that we can talk about what actually happened, the evidence, and that helps people remember what happened. And that's a good thing, but they can't really enforce anything. But guess what? I always tell people, the city council has subpoena power, but they don't use it because we don't make them use it. We have to look at the city charters of each city and find out what powers do they have before we elect these people. And once we elect them, make them hold these people called police officers accountable. We don't hardly ever do that. Now in Austin, Texas, our fight is on every level. Police department, city council, commissioner's court, state level. But here's our biggest issue. I mentioned the Texas Penal Code, which almost guarantees every cop immunity from prosecution. That has to be amended by state representatives. If you amend those penal codes, which always give court police power, that means when these DAs interpret these statutes, they have to be more balanced. But that conversation almost never occurs. These state folks get elected every year, but they never address these slavery-based penal codes. Here's the other problem. There's a thing called 18 U.S.C. 242. 18 U.S.C. 242 that most lawyers know about. That's when you call in the Department of Justice, they come to town to do an investigation, and oftentimes, I'm just going to say this, wind up with the same conclusion as everybody else. I'm going to explain it in a minute. This statute was written after the Civil War. After the Civil War. What they say is, Mr. Leonard, when we come to Austin, Texas, we got to prove intent. We got to prove that somebody woke up one morning without shot a black person in the back. We know damn well that's not going to happen. So let's change the conversation a little bit. We talk about things like bad tactics, bad policies, and criminal negligence. See, that's the conversation, but guess what? Under that statute, they can't use that. And let me give you a vivid national example. How many folks saw Albuquerque, New Mexico? There's a war in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I was there in 2006 doing a presentation. They've had 39 shootings in the past 3 years, have a 2% black population, and most of the victims are black. Albuquerque has about 600,000 people. About a month ago, somebody recorded a police shooting on live TV where they shot this homeless guy outside of Albuquerque for no reason. All of a sudden, because it was on TV, here comes the FBI. And guess what? Within 2 weeks, they did an investigation and said, you know what? This is illegal. Now, what about the other 38 shootings that took place the past 3 years? What were these guys at then? You see, this stuff happens every day. And if we don't remind folks of when it's happening, where it's occurring, they don't do anything. They should have been there 3 years ago. They would have saved probably 36 lives. But to their credit, they put that city under they're going to be under some kind of consent decree, just like Seattle was a few years ago, just like Miami was. But the whole key is what we do locally. Because if our infield can stop these ground balls before they get to the outfield, we can stop these guys before it becomes a bigger issue. Once they escape our infield, our defenses, it's a major fight. So my goal is to make sure that we connect the dots, whether we're in Austin, Texas, or Chicago, Illinois, make sure that we communicate about what we're doing. And I can assure you, just looking at Chicago's government, if local organizations do their jobs, and sometimes, just like mine, they don't, but I can tell you in Austin, Texas, we do. In my city, everybody's important. We're all volunteers. Nobody pays us. There's no possibility of being bought up by anybody. We believe in justice for everybody. In these local organizations, if you compile your data, look at the disparities, and educate your community, you can do things like Title VI and tell the federal government, look, in this city, we have a pattern of racial discrimination. We want you to withhold $10 million based on that assessment. Then you begin to get people's attention. But if you're not organized, if you don't use the power you do have in your daily fight, this stuff is going to continue. Let me tell you why I'm optimistic. I just mentioned we got our first indictment in 12 years because we understood the game. And here's the game. You see, on a local level, when a DA takes a case, they do the same thing. They use the Texas Penal Code or the Illinois Penal Code. And so they talk about intent in most of these shootings. And until grand juries, you got to base this thing based on intent. And if you don't prove intent, you can't get an indictment. We said, no, wait a minute. Let's put more options on the table. Let's talk about manslaughter. Let's talk about criminal negligence. And guess what? This week we got a manslaughter indictment. Only because we read the statutes and understood that these guys were playing a game. And they're playing a game all over this country. So when DAs begin to gather grand juries, yes, the racial composition is important, but more important is what are the instructions? What are they telling the grand jury? They say when you only got one option. Murder is very difficult to prove under these state penal codes. Manslaughter less so, criminal negligence more so. So we need to change the whole game plan of how we see these things and make sure when we fight these battles, we use everything at our disposal. And as I close out, I've always seen these police issues as a military battlefield. This is essentially a war. A war is based on understanding of the battlefield and also discipline. It's a military organization. They respect military organizations. They respect people that think that way. So when you mobilize, you do so with a discipline and understanding of what your rights are. It's also very difficult and very sacrificial. Nobody in this business that's doing that job is going to be rich. Say that again. If you're rich in this business, something's wrong. Okay? I'm not calling any names. In our business, we want you to get justice. And when you get justice, think about who we are. But we don't get rich in this business. Our job is to make sure that there's a balanced playing field and that this thing called the Constitution of the United States is being enforced on every level. And right now, it's not. However, what I'm seeing in Texas is a very difficult state. I know Chicago has its challenges, but hey, come visit Texas once in a while and work about half a block from Rick Perry's office, and you know what I mean. Now, I'm in good health. I'm very optimistic about where we're headed in this thing because I know right now, I can sense, thanks to Brother Chapman, that there's a new mentality out here right now. I sense a certain kind of optimism about these issues. We're learning. And see, once you understand the game, you're going to win the game. But we've got to do a better job of getting out of our old habits and define this new battlefield to make sure that all of our troops are mobilized. In the military, there's an army, you got your ground troops, you got your artillery, you got your Navy. We need all of them. We're on the front line. We need good attorneys who will fight and get people's rights. But we have to connect the dots. If we don't connect the dots, this stuff is going to continue. And I tell you right now, when I look at Texas, as bad as Texas can be, and as redressive as Texas can be, we see a lot of victories. So thank you for this conference today. I am so excited about this weekend. I can't wait. I can tell you the folks in Austin, Texas are very excited about me being here. This is one heck of a place, by the way, good and bad. And I expect to learn a lot while I'm here, but more importantly, I want to make some connections while I'm here so we can talk to each other. So when you have issues like Title VI complaints, how to organize them, or how to stop these issues before they get started, we can talk to each other. We can have our own national network, a database when there's a police shooting. We should all know about it. so we can automatically get a picture right away, not 2 years later. And when we mobilize and the call comes out, we come in from every state and every city with the same purpose and same mindset. That's who I am. That's why I'm here. And thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Brother Linda. 35 years ago, the Alliance filed a petition before the United Nations charging human rights violations in the United States with respect to the number of political prisoners in the United States. It was historic then. The only other petition that was filed at the United Nations was filed by Paul Robeson and William Patterson in 1957. Last March, we have someone here who is a pioneer, longtime human rights activist, who brought the issue of police crimes to the United Nations before the Human Rights Commission in Geneva. I'd like to invite Krista Noel to share those experiences with us.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm so happy to see everyone here. This is a very special occasion, and I hope that this is the first annual National Police Crimes Forum, and that next year we'll have another one. It'll be bigger and better. So I am charged with telling you about my experience at the UN in Geneva this March. But I want to tell you about the campaign that brought us there and how it started. And the campaign was actually the campaign to get the police officer who shot and killed Rekia Boyd charged with something, okay? But I want to say, first of all, 71 million that ROM has set aside for overtime is approximately how much money taxpayers spent last year on civil suits against the Chicago police. And at least 31 million of that was for violence against women. The arrest-related deaths report, which comes out every 3 years, which our brother from Austin talked about how we need to know immediately when there's a death with the police, or death by police. We need to know immediately. This report by the Bureau of Justice Statistics, this report comes out every 3 years. We don't know for 3 years how many people have been killed by the police. But every year they put out a report called LEOCA, Law Enforcement Officers Killed in Action. So we know every year about them, but we got to wait 3 years to find out about us. Last year, 40 police officers were killed. The average for individuals, civilians killed by police is 400 a year. You know what that makes it? 10 to 1. 10 people are killed for every one police officer. And that's the ones that they can prove that the police officers actually killed you. There were actually 4,800 people killed in arrest-related deaths. So that's once you go into the jail and they find you hung in your cell, or you just die and they don't know why, and you just end up dead in the cell and they can't tell why, you know. It doesn't have anything to do with that police officer who was choking you. But that's a lot of people. And that's a fight we have to fight too, because they haven't signed the act to have arrest-related deaths report made mandatory every year. They haven't signed it yet. It's been hanging around since 2007. Congress hasn't signed it again. So we got to do something about that. So let me tell you about the campaign of Rekia Boyd. And this is a campaign that I call to get a police officer charged. First, we marched. I think the guys' names are Mark and Paul. We marched on the west side in front of the police officer's house. We started in front of his house, and that is where Rekia was killed. She was killed right outside of his house. He came out of his house while she was walking down the street and shot her because he didn't like what the guys had said to him. They thought he was in plain clothes in a Benz, I think it was, driving through the alley. They thought he was a drug dealer or a John. And so they told him to get the F away, right? And he shot and killed Rekia because of that. So we marched outside of his house. We marched around the west side saying, you protect my daughter, I'll protect yours. We met up with Operation Push, Jesse Jackson. And we got Jesse Jackson Jr. to write a letter to Lisa Madigan asking for her to give money to the family for victims assistance. Now, victims assistance goes to victims of crime. They didn't quite consider it a crime yet, right? It had to be investigated before they could give any money to them. The investigator had to be completed. They needed money for the funeral and grief counseling right then, not once the investigation was completed. We called Senator Meeks for assistance. Okay, so we got a congressman, a senator, and we're marching on the streets, right? I met Jeff Baker, wherever he is, at a police board meeting. And then I was handed a flyer for police hearings by Frank Chapman, the chairman of the Alliance, at a police board meeting. And I went to the Alliance police board meeting, and I said, I'm going to join this movement. You all should join this movement. We decided to call it police crimes versus brutality. Because when you hear brutality, what do you think of? You think of somebody getting hit over their head. You don't think of sexual assault. You don't think of murder. Or like I've said many times, what they like to call involuntary manslaughter. And excessive force, if that isn't a euphemism, I don't know what is. On the anniversary of Rekia's death, we delivered 3 letters. One to Lisa Madigan, one to Anita Alvarez, and one to the Chicago U.S. Attorney, asking them to charge this man with a crime. It had an anniversary of her death. It's been a year. They ain't given up the money for the family. It's a year. And they haven't charged him with any crime. And they continue to tell us the investigation is ongoing. The Alliance created some committees, right? And one of the committees was the Human Rights Committee. And that's where I re-met Larry Redmond, because I had met Larry Redmond at the Midwest Coalition for Human Rights seminar on juvenile issues, police crimes, specifically tasers, and I think it was immigration. So I re-met Larry, and I joined the committee, and the committee was led by Cam Howard, and Khalid managed the committee. And we decided, to write a shadow report for the Alliance. And we decided to write that report and call it the extrajudicial killings of Africans in Chicago by the police. It was 3 pages, not very long, 3 pages. And it had to be 3 pages because they said that there are a lot of reports that go to the UN, and as much as they love to read very long reports, if you want your report read, make it short, sweet. So we made a short, sweet report. Khalid started it off. We put in statistical analysis, like I just told you. 4,700 people had been killed in the last 7 years in arrest-related deaths. Do you know what was reported in 80 years for lynchings? 4,700. They're doing it in 7 years. And it's unreported for them as well. So Khalid started writing, and he said that it was genocide. It was a form of genocide. At the point that we wrote it, 88% of the police shootings were of African people. Cam brought it home, and we made a direct mention of Rekia Boyd. It was like the last line in the second paragraph. Three meetings in person, and then through the internet, going back and forth, writing it in a Word document, editing and re-editing. We sent the report to the United States Human Rights Network, okay? And they submitted it to the UN and the US. They approved it, submitted it to the UN and the US, and if you want to read it, it's on their website. It was updated, a 7-page version of it is on the website. The 3-pager was updated. And the US gets this report, right? So after attending some what they call civil society conference calls, and these civil society conference calls are with the United States government, okay, the DOJ, all the Department of Housing, all of these departments are on these conference calls, and you can make statements to them. And Joey Mogul made a statement about the John Burge issue. We were granted a scholarship to go to Geneva. Whoa. Before I left for Geneva to talk before the UN about the death of Rekia Boyd, Anita Alvarez charged him with involuntary manslaughter. That's what going to the UN can do. When we went to the UN on John Burge, we came back and he was charged. The US does not like you going to the UN. Since the very first time we went to the UN, Du Bois went to the UN in 1947, was it? Yeah. The US got PO'd and said, how can you embarrass us in front of the UN? They do not like you going to the UN. So where do you go when you want to get a police officer charged with a crime? To the UN. We testified before the UN's committee, and we wrote an additional report through email. I'm in Geneva, they're in Chicago. We wrote an additional report. Cam and Larry were the main authors of that report. We connected with Stan Willis and his wife, Vicky, and they wrote an update on the Burge case, and we submitted that to the UN secretary. And she said, we're watching. I testified as a survivor before the committee, and I told them that my country had betrayed me. I spoke directly to the Assistant Attorney General and asked him to put Chicago under consent decree and asked him what was taking him so long. The result of that work, starting from a march, getting the officer charged, to going to the UN and making all these updates to the report, the result was a statement made by the Commission for the International Convention for Civil and Political Rights in their concluding observations to the United States on the treaty guidelines. The committee is concerned about the still high number of fatal shootings by certain police forces, including Chicago, and reports of excessive force used by certain law enforcement officers, including the deadly use of tasers, which have a disparate impact on African Americans, and use of lethal force by Customs and Borders Protections officers at the U.S.-Mexico border. The state party should step up its efforts to prevent the excessive use of force by law enforcement officers by ensuring compliance with the 1990 UN Basic Principles on the use of force and firearms by law enforcement officers. It should ensure that the new CBP, Border Patrol, directive on use of deadly force is applied and enforced in practice, and improve reporting of excessive use of force violations, and ensure that the reported cases of excessive use of force are effectively investigated, alleged perpetrators are prosecuted, and if convicted, punished with appropriate sanctions, that investigations are reopened when new evidence becomes available, and that victims or their families are provided adequate compensation. Then they mentioned legislation on torture. Now, this isn't the convention for torture. There's a separate convention for torture, but we had written about Burge, right? While noting that acts of torture may be prosecuted in a variety of ways at both the federal and state levels, the committee is concerned about the lack of comprehensive legislation criminalizing all forms of torture, including mental torture committed within the territory of the state party. The committee is also concerned about the inability of torture victims to claim compensation from the state party and its officials due to the application of broad doctrines of legal privilege and immunity. The state party should enact legislation to explicitly prohibit torture, including mental torture, wherever committed, and ensure that the law provides for penalties commensurate with the gravity of such acts, whether committed by public officials or other persons acting on behalf of the state or by private persons. The state party should ensure the availability and compensation to victims of torture. And that was the campaign for Rekia Boyd, and that's how it ended, and I thank you.
Thank you, Krista. Before we open up questions from the floor to the panelists, or any observations that any of you would like to make, I noticed that someone came into the room whom I would like you all to join me in welcoming. This is a person who has spent the last 65 years fighting on behalf of people in the United States and worldwide for peace, justice, and human rights. She was the first woman in the United States to run for president of the United States. Through her organizing efforts nationally and internationally, it resulted in the freedom of Angela Davis. She has been the moving force, the individual who had the foresight to organize and continue organizing the campaign that led to the successful acquittal of Angela Davis, recognizing there's a difference between where the law stops and power begins. And power begins in the people and on the streets. I want you to stand and welcome, help me welcome, Charlene Mitchell. We have one other panelist who will be speaking both on this session and also this afternoon in the breakout sessions. This is a brother who has been a leader in the struggle for human rights, civil rights, a fighter against police crimes. Brother Jazz Hayden.
Got no business doing that, man. I'm on your side. I'm watching you provide courtesy, professionalism, and respect. You shine that light in my eyes, okay. Yeah, go ahead and shine it. Yeah, you can shine it. Yeah, shine it. This is the police officer who has stopped two individuals and is frisking them, and he's trying to prevent me from recording this event. I'm on the police side. Don't give them permission to search nothing. Yeah. Yeah, look at that. All right. I got you. Yeah, that's right. Flash the light in my eye. That's fine. This is NYPD practice. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, like we ain't got enough problems in Harlem already, man. Yeah. Yeah, I'm stepping back. Black man. Yeah. They put a black face on enforcement. Yeah. And that's the light from the police officer shining in the camera here. There are many that speak about police violence, and they want to join a movement to bring police violence to a change, to an end. But the biggest, the answer to police violence rests with us. It's a change in the way that we perceive the police is the first step. Now, I wanted to show you in this video that I have absolutely no respect for police that abuse their power. They are just another group of raggedy-ass human beings, just like us. You know, they wake up in the morning, their breath stink, their behind stink, you know, and they have to, all the same problems that we have, they have. I can bring somebody in here right now and give each one of you a uniform, a police uniform, and you wouldn't stop being the people that you are. You know, the uniform disguises who you are. You know, it gives you the stamp of the state on your uniform and the right to murder and abuse the law. But the people inside those uniforms are no different than you or I. They are just human beings, right? And the diversity that's in this room here in terms of personality and beliefs and all the things that each one of us are a part of, you know, selfishness, human selfishness, greed, you know, disrespect for others. All of that is inside that uniform, inside that individual, you know. And as long as we continue to attribute this sense of righteousness and power and authority to these individuals, and we keep dealing with them on that basis, and stop seeing them as the human beings that they are behind those uniforms, we're going to continue to have this problem. You know, but state take advantage of it. Who are the police? Where did they come from? The people in these uniforms. They come from the same demographic that goes into the military, right? The same age group, the same lack of life experience, the same lack of intelligence and education that goes into the military. They go into the military, they burn, rape, loot, and pillage all over the globe, and they come back and we call them heroes. Well, from that same demographic, they go into the police force. And I see it every day in New York City, down by my office. You know, they have an academy for training police. And every time I pass a group of them, I tell them, don't forget where you came from. And they look at me and they smile. No, I ain't gonna forget, you know. But when they get that uniform on, and after they graduate from the academy, it's all about the blue. They're no longer black, brown, beige, white. They have become part of the biggest gang in New York City. 43,000 of them. Huh? And their only allegiance is to that structure, to that organization. I mean, the shifting demographics in the police department is something that most of us longed for during the civil rights struggle. We need more blacks on the police force. We need more Latinos on the police force. Well, now we got them. And you know what? They're worse than those that were there before them. There is absolutely no difference. You talk about black on black crime, I call it black on black grime. I'm talking about women are the largest contingent in New York City corrections. Rikers Island is the biggest jail I think in the world. And the largest population of correction officers on Rikers Island are women. Not just women, but black women. And they come out of the same projects in the same communities in the same neighborhoods that the inmates in Rikers Island come from. They have us policing ourselves. This system of social control has come up with a way to have the rural poor and the urban poor, to bring them together and make one the keeper and one the kept. And this is what's happening. And that's who the police are. And we need to stop talking about them as though they, accepting their image of the police. You know, that they're some type of champions of justice. Justice for who? Democracy, defenders of democracy. Democracy for who? The police are the arm of the state. The state is the organized power of the ruling class, the oligarchs, the rich, the powerful, the wealthy. The criminal justice system is just an enforcement arm. And at the end of that arm, where the rubber meets the road, is the police. And their job is to enforce the rules and regulations that are laid down by those in power. That's it. They're not there to provide no justice. They're not there to provide fairness. They're not there to provide anything but enforcement and get that paycheck and those benefits, job benefits. And this, until we begin to look at them, you know, the relationship between the police in the community is master and servant. But they've taken the relationship and turned it upside down. We pay them with our taxes. They work for us. They are our employees. They are not our equals. We don't sit down and negotiate with them. You know, as long as we have that mentality that they are some type of independent body that we have to sit down and negotiate with, we are losing. The police work for us. They are our employees, and they've taken that relationship and flipped it. And all the legal remedies under the Constitution and state constitutions and whatever, they have been used, and all they do is morph into new ways for police to abuse their authority. The only real change that can come is when we, as individuals, begin to look at the police differently and stop talking about them in terms of this legalese and this legislative language, you know, because that don't work. It don't work. You know, how did we get here? Where did the police come from? You know, in every family, there's one individual that mediates between the family and the rest of the world. You know, that individual defends the family, represents the family, you know, sees that the family is not abused. Well, this is where the whole concept of policing came from, right? But as the population grew, we turned this power or this responsibility over to the state. And the state created this police force, you know, this entity we call the police. And it got away from us. So now we don't even have control over our families anymore. You know, parens patriae, I'm sure some of you have heard of that, right? That's the state as family. You know, as parent. The state has taken over that role in our families. Our kids can go to the state, and the state can tell us, hey, you know, we taking your kid away, or you got to do this with your kid. You know, that's where policing came from. That's where policing morphed into. The state has taken complete control of our lives, man. And they've created this force that doesn't exist in our interests, but it exists in the interests of those that have made those decisions. So how do we begin to deal with this? I say that the necessary step is a change in consciousness, a change in the way that we view the police and that way that we view this police problem. We can sit up here, man, and academize this all day long. We can talk about it in every language on the planet, but it's not going to change until we change. Until we change the way that we see them, until we begin to see them as servants and not as our masters, right? In New York City, if the speed limit is 40 miles an hour and a police car is going 30 miles an hour, everybody in the traffic will not pass that police car. How the hell are you going to be afraid of, you know, some raggedy-ass human being driving a car down the street? I mean, the sign says clearly that you can go 40 miles an hour. And you know what? If you pass them, in their arrogance, they will pull you over and give you a ticket. Give you a ticket. And they'll create some trumped up charge. But the fact of the matter is, you know, in their arrogance, they can do this and can get away with it simply because we allow them to. My solution to police violence is personal liability. And some of the speakers that have spoken before me have touched on this also. Personal liability is the solution. Community control of policing is the solution. But personal liability is definitely a much needed change. Police have to be responsible for their actions, man. Just like the rest of us are responsible for our actions, they have to be responsible for theirs. How many of you have seen the Wolf of Wall Street? Huh? In that movie, the actors or the people on Wall Street are sniffing cocaine out of fruit bowls this big. They're smoking every kind of weed you can think of. They're taking every kind of pharmaceutical drug you can think of. But nobody ever mentions illegal drugs, or drug dealing. And if Wall Street, the people on Wall Street take advantage of the average citizen and abuse them in some kind of way, they get civil fines, civil penalties, right? And if you look around at the police, it's the same thing. They are exempt, it seems, from criminal law. And the things that they routinely lock poor people of color up for and fill up these cages with human beings for, police are exempt from them. Wall Street is exempt from them. That should tell you something. The voice you heard on there was mine. And that's, when you deal with the police like that, getting up here making speeches is not what I do. Not diminishing the importance of making speeches. But I have to get down in the streets, man. I have to confront this directly, and without fear. And that's what my panel will be about. My breakout session was, how do we get to that point where we begin to confront police abuse directly, you understand, and show them the same respect that you show us. If they don't show us any, we don't show them any. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Hayden, for sharing with us your experiences. Now, this is a brother, as the video attempted to show, who confronts the police on the streets. I would not suggest that you do this without some training, because you can end up in handcuffs, end up with knots on your head. But this is a courageous brother, because anytime you move to exercise control, and you can talk about the Constitution, and you can talk about what rights you have, and you can talk about the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, but they will put some knots on your head. But if you notice something on the tape, he was able to assert his authority. They knew that they were dealing with someone who knew his rights, and he was recording their every actions. So while they attempted to intimidate him, while they attempted to obscure what he was doing, they didn't dare to go beyond that. And so we should go to his workshop and get some pointers. Okay, I'd like to invite the rest of the panelists to come up here. You in the audience will have an opportunity for the next 30 minutes or so to ask follow-up questions, and then we will break. I know you have been sitting for a while. If you want to stand in place, you can't leave. If you want to stand in place and stretch your legs, you can do that. But we want to finish up this morning session by inviting our panelists to come back up. Brother Baker, you got to come. Yeah. Bob Warden, if you try to leave the door, you'll find out it's locked. You have to be here until to answer some questions.
The police locked it.
All right, if you have questions, come up to a mic. We have a mic right here. Identify yourself, and then tell us to whom you are addressing a question or whether or not you are making a comment. Okay, we will take the first person.
Good afternoon. My name is Vince Wallace. I'm with Breaking Voices News. This is actually going to be, it's at breakingvoices.com, and this story here is actually going to be our maiden voyage, which just launched this week.
Thank you.
And I haven't felt this kind of energy in a room for a little while. Like we're on the verge of something. And I mean, I'll tell you, I got friends who are moving to Chicago from New York right now because of the police. And one of them is a white Jewish Republican. But he's tired of the police and how they're policing the city. My question is, how do we move from a situation where there's a general narrative where we allow the fraternal order of police to be the first and last word on police crimes or police shootings? How do we move from a situation like that to what we want without changing the minds of the people who are watching the news and that sort of thing? Because in my mind, I don't think that we get there unless we decriminalize poverty. Everybody feels that there is this narrative about poverty, like you have no money, so obviously you're gonna go out and be a criminal. You're going to be more likely to be a criminal. You live in this neighborhood, you're more likely to do this, that, and the other. And that's just not, you're more likely to be victimized by it. And people don't know that. People don't understand that. So my question to you is, how would you fold in the idea of decriminalizing poverty into this whole thing?
All right, who would like to respond?
Is this thing on? Yes, it is. What's your name again? I'm sorry. Vince Wallace. I think you answered the question that you asked, which was somehow we have to convince people that the treatment that they're receiving, they do not deserve. So we cannot change this system without changing the minds of the people first and foremost. And that's why we as an organization, the Alliance Against Race and Political Repression, spend weekends on corners informing the people, educating the people. But what I'm really, really, really happy about is the fact that you, the media, are here. And you plan to spread this word. Without the media, and not necessarily the mainstream media, but the media that is the community-based media has to pick this up, has to tell this truth. And in doing so, they take a chance of not being hired by Chicago Tribune, which means that we as a community have to support you and media like you that are willing to tell the truth. If we don't support you, you will quite possibly end up on the other side, and we will never get this message out. We will never change the minds of the people, which means we will never get to the goal that you talked about.
Anyone else wish to respond?
I think you were talking about the intersectionality of the police with what we call occupying or terrorizing the communities that are underserved. The problem with policing of the underserved, and I believe you said this, is that the statistical information is skewed towards believing that the underserved are actually the ones that are committing all the crimes, and they commit it at a higher rate than the privileged. And I think Michelle Alexander made that clear when she said that the war on drugs, which is the true problem that we have, the war on drugs is a war on the underserved. It's not a war on the privileged, because the privileged and the underserved are using drugs at approximately the same rate. So it's the statistical information. I remember when I was younger, there was the welfare mom, and everybody thought that welfare was only in the African community, whereas the majority of the people on welfare were Anglos, right? So it's the information, as Jeff was saying, that the media puts out there that creates the myths, you know, that exist when it comes to the underserved community. The underserved community is a wonderful, brilliant, innovative community that is being held down by everything that's being said about them that they are internalizing. If they would stop internalizing what's said about them, we'd be okay. I'll sit up here and I'll say ain't from here to eternity. Ain't is an English word. It's not something made up by black people. But we internalize this thing called black English when it's just another dialect. But we don't call it another dialect and another American dialect, even though you can sound pretty much like a complete idiot speaking with a Southern accent. But we internalize everything bad that's said about us. And then they take that information and they use it in order to terrorize the community. And then the community believes that they deserve to be terrorized. So we have issues, okay? And the first issue that we have to do as African people in America is we have to believe that we really are the first human beings on earth, okay? And that we belong here, and that we are strong, and especially the ones that came to America. I mean, you had to go from the jungles in Africa to the coast, walking in chains, get on a boat, come across that boat for 2-3 months, across water where people were jumping off in the middle of the ocean, get over here, be put in chains and in pens, then make it through plantations. Everybody alive today got some of the best genes in the world in them. And you're in America and you living and you let them let you believe that you do not have the ability to make it. So we as African people and with our alliances have to change the language we use to describe ourselves, and then we have to make sure that the media hears us.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Use the mic.
Okay.
Pull
We
it to
talk-
you, pull it to you.
We're talking about what it would take to change this relationship between us and the police. The police, let's be clear about this, man. Their job is social control. And it's not just here in America, and it's not just in communities of color. It's all over the planet. Everywhere there is an other that poses a threat to those in power, there will be police. And their job is social control. There's no more cotton for us to pick. Industry has moved overseas. We constitute surplus population, throwaway people. You know, and because of that, they have to control us. We represent social dynamite, man. They already saw that in the 60s with the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, the bowel movements, everything. Their job, the job of the police, is to control that population that represents potential threat to the status quo. They ain't going nowhere.
All right, the next question, please.
Hi, how you doing? Hello, thank you very much. So my question is, if
Please
anyone,
identify yourself.
my name is Julio Alejandro. I'm the correspondent for Excelsior and La Jornada, which are two Mexican medias. My question is if they could talk to me about what are the strategies that you have to engage black and brown communities. Just as Frank told about us, there are not many Latinos or there are not many Mexicans in here. And how can you create a more intersectional approach, not towards so much Latinos, where you would have many Caribbeans and many people that would come from a third, fourth, fifth generations that have been living here for a lot of years, but more about the monolingual, undocumented, primarily Mexicans, indigenous, rural people who have no knowledge, no concepts, no rights, no legal rights in that sense. And within this atmosphere where we have the best, the brightest, the most solidar people who are working for social justice, if they could give us a national perspective of how in some of the places of the US they've helped these immigrants, and not immigrants as a whole, I mean pretty much the Mexicans and the Central Americans who don't speak English, who are apolitical and so on. How can they help them to create more of a black and brown community, of bringing the African Americans or the people who are being primarily violated their rights and police crimes with these people who doesn't have the legal status or the legal conception or basically any knowledge or basically the language to speak in front of here.
Does everyone understand the question? How do we broaden the base? How do we proceed to establish a broader coalition, to educate a broader population as we move on this campaign? Is that what you're saying?
What are the strategies for people who don't speak English, basically? Okay. And are being harassed by the same
particularly non-English speaking people in the United States, how do we reach out to them and bring them into this campaign? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I got two things.
Okay, panelists, I want you to be brief and to the point.
We don't have the answer, but when you come to the table, we can come up with the answer. That's first off. So hopefully you'll be in the breakout to help us come up with the answer. But I will say this. If we take the hammer out of the hand of the police officer, the hammer that is destroying, it protects everybody that would have been hit with that hammer. Does that make sense? Yeah. So our job is to provide the tools or take away the weapon that hurts us all. It doesn't just protect the African American English speaking, but there's an opportunity for it to protect other interest groups, those other people as well. Other than that, I'll wait sitting at the table with you so we can come up with better strategy.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Just to add to that, we did send out calls in Spanish to the Spanish community. So we were sending out calls, and everything was translated into Spanish.
I'm here from Texas, Austin, Texas, which is a large population of Hispanics and also immigrants. We work with LULAC, a group called El Concilio. What happens is, in advance, we go to each other's forum. We have a contract, sort of a relationship. They have forums, we go and we talk and we support their forums, and they support ours. But it's a two-way street. Everybody has to reach out to everybody else. It's not just the organizations. You guys got to reach out also. So in Austin, Texas, and Houston and Dallas, when there's a forum on immigration, we go. When there's a forum on civil rights, they go. And what happens is people talk and they build relationships over a period of time. But everybody has to reach out and make sure that they respond to these issues. And that's the beginning of the process. Reach out, communicate, go to other people's events and make sure you build relationships.
I'm not the perfect person to respond to that, but I think it's a deep question that we all have to work at. I want to just note two things. Fastest growing prison population in the United States, as you probably know, sir, is undocumented. And it's the source of most of the private prison building. You know, in Illinois, we fought off private prisons. But there was an effort to bring in a private prison for immigrants, undocumented immigrants, which we fought back. But the point is that the building of prisons for undocumented is the fastest growing in the last decade. And it's a solid basis for us working in common, but we have to build that alliance. And in my experience in Chicago, whenever there's struggle, big struggles going on, let's take the Chicago teacher strike, for example, we are together. Or take, for example, the immigrant rights marches from a decade ago here in Chicago. You know, those are really powerful places for us to build common ties.
Could we have the next?
Good morning to the panel. My name is Calvin Jackson. I'm a member of the Chicago Anti-Eviction Campaign. We're about taking back the land and confronting the banks, from illegally taking their homes in here in Chicago. My first question is to Mr. Baker about the police accountability. And you was talking more about having an elected board and how do we do that, and do we always have to have an elected one? And the second question was to Mr. Hayden when he talked about confronting the police civilly. Do you mean, like, should we sue these policemen personally and put liens on their homes and their bank accounts, hurt them that way? I want you to talk a little bit more about that because I like your, right.
Okay, I wanted to speak on his. I know people that actually do that and have had great success and have, but they have also got some lumps on their head too, suing the police, been sued back. But going back to your question about CPAC, I believe that it has to be elected personally. But once again, I'm all about us having a debate and a discussion and developing the best answer. But I would love to see it as an elected board. I think it should remain an elected board. That's what I would argue for, whether or not it's single district, whether it's citywide election. Single district may make it a more community-based group or organization or board, as opposed to a citywide election, which would allow for special interests to dump a lot of money into it and so on and so forth. But that's where I stand on that.
Brother Hayden.
Yeah. In New York City, they have what they call the Civilian Complaint Review Board. And the Civilian Complaint Review Board consists of 13 votes, I think, yeah. And the mayor has 5, and the police commissioner has 3. That's a majority of the I think it's 11 votes. 11 votes. What we need is community-based control of policing. We should be the most powerful voice and the final word on how policing is done in our communities. This is attainable. This is attainable. This isn't something, man, that just like they put that Civilian Complaint Review Board together and gave the mayor 5 votes and gave the police commissioner, who he appoints, 3 more votes, out of 11, we can dismantle that and restructure it. Everything that we do in terms of police reform should ultimately end up with the demand that the communities that are being policed have the final word on how policing is done in their communities.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Next question.
Yes, I'm Mike Elliott. I'm the Labor Secretary for the Chicago Alliance Against Racism and Political Repression, and I'm with the United Auto Workers Local 551. And I don't have a question. I just wanted to make a statement about the fact that we are having a labor breakout session. Since no one on the panel is representing labor, we want to make sure that people know that we're having a labor breakout session that would address the issues affecting workers and the police. And Ann Mitchell, Pat Fry, and myself are leading that breakout. And we would like to have the participation of those in labor that are interested in how we can work in solidarity to end this police violence. And Brother Alejandro, I hope that you will be there because we're going to be addressing issues about violence as it relates to the immigrant community. Thank you.
Okay, next question or statement.
Okay, my name is Lucretia Burtz. I'm here representing the Illinois Juvenile Justice Commission Youth Advisory Board. I kind of have 2 comments or questions. The first is, how do we navigate within systems? And before you comment, I just want to give you some context. Nelson, I believe your name is. You said something about if you're making money in this business, then like in this, in organizing, then you're not necessarily on the right lines or there's something wrong. And I feel like I'm 24, I should say that. I've been broke for like a whole year. and I want to do this work, right? But this notion that like people in the movement have to be broke and they have to struggle and like you have to be on the other side of the fence to make a difference, I really feel like that hasn't been helping us, right? Resources is the main reason that we're in this issue. People of color, poor people don't have resources. They don't have the ability, the manpower, well, we probably have the manpower, we don't have the financial power to force change. And so I really just want, like, I guess the comment in regards to that question about how do we navigate within these systems is, like, we need to figure out how do we avert funds to our causes, right? Because the police are getting paid. So we can get those dollars. We need those dollars in our community. So, like, I think that there should be a transparent way that we're going about, rallying for funds and money. But I think that we need to just really review how do we bring resources and how do we, just organize with funds, because I can't do it. I have needs, and I want to be a part of this movement. But that's my main issue. And so this whole question about navigating within systems, like if I have a job, right, that's not necessarily in a movement, how do I, respectfully get them to pay attention to issues that I feel is important? And then answer that question, I have another one.
Did you want to grab? Sure. By the way, that's a great question. Let me be very clear. What I was saying is, you can't expect the folks who put you in jail and treat you like dogs to fund your movement. That's the problem. There are funds out there. By the way, I've been owning a business for 20 years. I work 60 hours at the business, and I volunteer for the other 40 hours. What I'm saying is, we have money. We have to invest in ourselves. We have to put a higher priority on our own people who work civil rights. One of our problems is, though, is that too often we get co-opted and corrupted. I was addressing that part of it. So to encourage you as a young lady, I was once young as well, it's okay to work, and if our people will invest more in our causes, we can fund ourselves, but we better be very careful about getting different kinds of funds from organizations or so-called philanthropists who make a lot of money, because oftentimes they're giving us money for the wrong reasons. So I'm just saying, as a caution light, be very, very careful, because those who pay the piper typically control the tune.
You know, black people have $1 trillion. 2 trillion? All right, I'm gonna accept your word on that. But even with just $1 trillion, you know, if we could finance any kind of movement we want in this country, you know, it's a lack of consciousness and I mean, just sheer ignorance, man. It's self-defeating, you know. We see Brad Pitt in the middle of Africa, you know, trying to do something for poverty or disease, you know, and the Jay-Z's and the Beyoncés of the world are, you know, billionaires and not contributing a dime. You know.
I've been asked to have Annabelle Perez, Bertha Escamilla, and Ms. Plummer to come up as the last three speakers to the mic to share some experiences with us.
Should I exit?
Do you have another question?
I just had
no,
another.
the young lady who's at the mic now.
Me? Okay. I just had another comment. I think, like, I see a lot of people here, and I don't see a lot of young people. And I just think going forward, like, please invite young people to the organizing table. Like, so when you're having this, allow us to help you so that we can make sure that we have voices from all across the table. And that's my final comment.
Oh, we invite everybody. Oh, okay. And you have a role to play. So once again, now we have you at the table, correct? Mm-hmm. And you will invite more. And we have invited, and most of our interns who probably did most of the work to make this happen, mm-hmm. look like you, sound like you, and are youthful just like you. So they're there, they exist, but we need help to reach out better, do a better job of reaching out. We need help on everything. That's always the theme of my presentation. Somebody help me. That's my theme. Help us do this work. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, speaker. Next speaker, please.
Yes, my name is Tricia Linwood, and I'm the founder of My Journey in Scripture, and I'm also a student at Loyola Graduate Program in Social Justice and Community Development. Specifically on building intentional Christian community development. And this question is for everyone, but in particular Mr. Hayden, because I hear a lot of narrative and a lot of word, and it reminds me of the book by Ferrer, A Pedagogy of the Oppressed, that the oppressors become like the oppressed if they don't change the vocabulary. Yeah. And so my question, and this is based on my experience helping the southeast side of Chicago close the the coal plants. And one of the things that happened, I think that really made a change, is that we went to the neighborhoods of the aldermen. And we began talking to their neighbors, not in a punitive tone, but, you know, what do you think perhaps your alderman can do in this situation? So I guess what I'm saying is one of the things that we did was we addressed humanity. We didn't judge the humanity. We didn't try to dominate the humanity, because then we become the oppressors. So, and I'm really impressed with you, Mr. Hayden, you know, wanting to go to the street. Is there any alternative programs that anyone has thought about addressing the police officer as a human? Because, you know, if they can change their political structure, I think it would be more lasting and more powerful than if someone came in and said, hey, look, we're going to take over this. We're going to force you to do this or that. And I'm not saying that that's not an option, but has anyone thought of you know, a third way or alternative, maybe speaking to the police officers on one-on-one or involving them in a conversation? Like, are there any police officers here?
Yeah, but they're not going to identify themselves.
I mean, but no, I mean, really. I mean, if you think about if you're wanting to do a change, wouldn't it seem that you would invite some of the people who may be interested to, and who could have the most profound influence?
All right, I think the question was put to Ms. Hayden.
Yeah. Well, anyone could answer, but I was, because
Mr.
but I was,
Hayden?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I've given a lot of thought to that too. You know, as a matter of fact, I'm looking for a good cartoonist. You know, and at every rally, in every event, and every demonstration, the police are there. But we don't talk to them. We don't address them. We don't challenge them, you know, the role that they're playing, you know, because, you know, you make me think about if I had a cartoonist, you know, I would draw up the historical path to their becoming policemen, you know, becoming part of the police force, and show them historically how you got here, man, you know, and that you are doing the work, especially with the change in demographics in police right now. We are seeing a black face being put on enforcement, you know, and you look at all the TV programs that go into prisons. You see black wardens, you know, black prison guards, you know, everything is, the face on enforcement has become darker and darker and darker. But we don't never address that population, right? And what you're saying and suggesting is that we do, that we should have that conversation with them, you know. And I agree with you 100%, you know. Recently in the Ukraine, the forces that were representing the you know, the so-called fascist arm of the Ukraine that took over the government, they sent out some forces to attack the demonstrators. And what happened was that the demonstrators talked to those forces, and they ended up turning their guns and tanks and everything else over, you know, to that faction, you know, that opposed the government, right? And that conversation with the police, I think, is something that we should think about, and maybe in our breakout session, you know, we should talk about that.
We talk to them all the time. All the time. We go to police board meetings. They're at police board meetings. We talk to them all the time. I'm on the listserv. I just finished arguing with 2 of them. So we talk to them all the time. But it's more than talking. It's a culture that has to change. So you need change management, you know, and you need to kind of infiltrate the police departments.
You see these words,
yeah.
Infiltrate,
well,
management.
You have
what
to,
about
you
just
have
building
to, you have to
relationships?
get people in there who are focused on change management and reform. And they have to kind of sneak in there, because you ain't gonna be able to come in, talk and reform and get on a police force.
No,
okay?
not at all. No.
Yes, I also agree that we have to use some of their tactics in infiltration. Yes. I know that there will be another page listed to my FBI file after this session. And as quietly as it's kept, folks. Next speaker. Identify yourself and
hello, my name is Andrea Perkins, and I'm with peoplesworld.org, but most importantly, I'm a member of the Chinook tribe in the Chinook Nation of Oregon and Washington. And I have a question/comment. The question is going to be open to all of you, but the militarized police force on indigenous land has grown over the last 10 years, especially outside of reservations, like where my family lives, and also where tar sands oil has been found, and where we're fighting the production of tar sands oil and the Keystone Pipeline. The growth of militarized police force being felt by my indigenous people, like I said, has grown. Our people have been brutally pepper sprayed, shot with rubber bullets in the last year, all because we're trying to protect the water and the land. My question is, how do you see, not just also, but also in Canada, United States, but also we are also fighting the border issue of how we as Native people didn't have that imaginary line, that border between the United States and Mexico, between the indigenous people here in the north, the indigenous people there in the south. So we're also fighting that line too. So how do you see reaching out to those indigenous communities? How do you see yourself reaching out to the Indian centers and the reservations and the reserves here and reaching out and talking to them about police brutality and how they can use the different skills and the different tools that you're using in African American communities and Latino communities, but take them to the reservations and take them to the front lines where, like I said, the indigenous people are fighting for environmental and human rights every day.
Excellent.
While I was in Geneva, there were about 6 or 7 indigenous tribes, and they were talking about the issue of environment. That was the main reason why they were there, the water and the pipelines, and their right to their own land. And I mean, the bottom line is, in order for us all to come together, we have to come together under human rights. You know, that is what will bring each and every person to the table, you know, and there are people out there who are already doing it. Actually, I think there was someone from the Chinook tribe in Geneva. But the indigenous people are at the human rights tables right now, you know, so.
Yes, there is a movement, an international movement of indigenous people at the United Nations. But I think your question that you're asking is, how can we, as part of this particular network, begin to share our experiences on the Indian reservations, Native American reservations, and how do we help that community who may be experiencing the same type of oppression, the same type of violence? How do we help them to struggle and become part of this campaign? And maybe our colleagues here would have some insights on that. Very, very important question.
Once again, it starts with you. Right. Networks work in both directions. So you have come here, now you can take back the knowledge, you can take back the strategies, the tactics, and share them, and begin to have them utilized. And maybe next year, the 42nd anniversary of the National Alliance Against Racism and Political Repression should be held where you are, perhaps. Mm-hmm. You guys can set it up. And then next, we'll have it in New York with Jazz. That's where it begins. That's the only way that this thing grows and spreads and we become one. And you find the commonality, and I like the way that Krista put it. Human rights is the commonality. The common thread through all of this is a betrayal, disregard for our human rights, our rights to be human.
Anyone else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next speaker.
Hi, my name's John Chasnoff. I'm from St. Louis with the Coalition Against Police Crimes and Repression there, and also Drone-Free St. Louis. So I wanted to raise a question about what I see as a new era of police tactics that are being used primarily for racial repression. And that's the whole complex of tactics that are centered around data-driven policing, predictive policing, intelligence-led policing. So the police now are trying to put on an objective front on racially biased data, racially biased arrests, feed those into computers and come out with hotspot areas, which are people of color neighborhoods, which are the hotspots for crime, or predictive policing where they feed the same racially biased data into the computer and come out with predictions of, in Chicago, who are the most likely to commit crimes in the future. And again, those are going to be people of color that get spit out of the computer. And along with this trend towards data collection, the police are encouraging each other to build fusion centers, to beef up the intelligence units in the local police departments and create essentially a police surveillance state. So in my mind, this is the future of repression, and I'm wondering how you all are thinking about how we get a handle on that question.
Can I address that?
Without law, there is no crime. Without crime, there is no punishment. Right? So if we want to control another group, we criminalize their behavior, right? And then we use that law to control them. What I'm seeing is this propensity to regulate every aspect of our lives, right? Every politician that's elected to office, whether it's to the federal government, state government, city, local government, their job is to pass legislation, which is more regulation. You know. And it's gotten so to the point where we can't even walk out our door and walk a block away from our home without breaking some law. You know. And this is, and so the world has really been reduced to the regulators and the regulated. And those of us that find ourselves belonging to that group, the regulated, we are here today. You know? And this is essentially what we're talking about. When we talk about the police, their job is to regulate, is to enforce regulations. Right? So, I mean, in the bigger, broader picture, this is where we're finding ourselves. And this is what we're up against, this propensity to regulate every aspect. First they commodify us and turn us into commodities, and then they regulate us, and they regulate us, and they regulate us. And we are beginning to feel the pinch. But the vast majority, 99% of Americans out there are totally unconscious to this process, and they agree with it. Yeah, pass more laws, pass more regulations. Until we're going to have to begin to start looking at that bigger picture, when we start talking about things like policing and police violence. This is just the tip of the iceberg. This is where the rubber meets the road. But this whole system is a system of regulations.
All right, we have two other panelists who are going to address this question of national surveillance, this policy of putting everyone's life under a microscope as exposed by Snowden. Brother Sankari, and then Sister Dawn.
So just real quickly here to direct the question as to what's happening, what are people doing on the ground around it. The youth program that I'm an organizer in, and the youth that I've been organizing for 3 years have been building a campaign that was led by all of the young people in our center, and they've decided through their research that they're going to start focusing on the fusion centers in Illinois. There's one that's housed in the city of Chicago, and there's one that oversees the Illinois State Police. So if you want more information about what that looks like, we could talk a little bit more in person, just so I don't take up everyone's time. But I also just wanted to say that I'm glad you brought it up, because I want to say that the idea of the national surveillance and the predictive policing and all of these things that are going on is a really good example of, again, how different. A lot of people are asking, how do we involve different communities? Different communities are used to create these policies that then affect other communities disproportionately. So fusion centers are created because of national security and terrorism, right? And predictive policing is created because of national security and terrorism, which has an Arab and South Asian and Muslim face. But predictive policing leads to more police officers in Black and Latino communities. And that's the link. And so I just wanted to put that out there as well.
I was just going to say two quick words. One is, I really recommend to everybody an incredible book by Dorothy Roberts about modern eugenics. You know, the eugenics movement 100 years ago, you know, which thought that you could predict criminality by the shape of your skull, you know, totally racist and race-based to the core. And she's arguing, Dorothy is arguing, that wrapping kind of a lot of police behavior in data is the new version of this, or in brain development, or in predicting through massive numbers. You know, one of the things that's all criminologists know, and really all human beings know, is that you can't predict future violence. You can't predict future crime individually. You can predict it if you have tens of thousands of numbers in a broad, general way. But you can't predict it, but yet every time there's a youth crime, or every time there's a school shooting or incident, there's an effort to find it. So in Chicago in the last 3 years, you saw the president come in, all kinds of money come in suddenly to the neighborhoods where there were gang shootings, right? And what were they going to do? They were going to identify through data those kids that were going to be violence prone. That's a fraud. That's a racist cover, in my opinion. It's outrageous that you would take a young child and predict them to be individually likely to be violent. One of the extraordinary things about the human spirit is that billions of people who have every reason to be violent aren't. You know, it's an incredible thing. And that's why everybody's always shocked when there's is my neighbor did that horrible crime? You know, that you can predict the news media about this. So I just think it's very important to do, as you point out, I think, by your question, a real harsh look at these kind of uses of numbers that is the same old game again, to target repression and more police into a particular neighborhood, or more kids who are going to get identified as future criminals with no basis other than false science and racism.
Thank you. Yes. Okay, we'll have the two last statements or questions. Three. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, my name is Tanya Stigger. I am from Local 551, and I'm just making a comment. I would like to say I'm very, very excited about having the opportunity to be here in this forum. And I just want to say, I know that the panel have touched on it quite a bit, that in order for us to gain success over police crimes and all the things that are under that umbrella, we need to become educated. Education is key. Knowledge is power. Education is key in us knowing our rights and the things that we can do to stand up against wrongful things done to us, especially by the police. I think that us here in this forum, and I think that's why a lot of us are here, we have to take back what we learn, what we hear, what it is that we know that's going to work and help make a difference. We need to take it back, and we have to spread the word, because that's the only way things are going to change. If we just come to these forums and we just sit and listen and do nothing, then nothing changes. So we have to help change the mindset, because if you keep doing the same thing over and over again and not getting a positive or better result, that's insanity. We need to change it up a little bit so that we can help make a difference. Separated, we're all over the place, but together, we can make a difference. So I applaud you guys on the panel, and I'm very happy to be here. For the young lady, the 24-year-old that's here, I commend you on being here. You are going to help make the difference with young people. At the same time, I know for a fact that there are many young people that are invited out and that are included in forums such as this one, but because they don't understand their power and their voice in being here, they don't know that they need to be here. So we have to help encourage them as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final speaker from the floor.
Hi, my name is Danilyn Powell Watts, and I also is from Local 551, which is the UAW. And I'm also a member of the Recreation Committee at the Local 551. I'm here as a mother a 15-year-old artistic young man, Stefan Edward Watts, who was shot and killed twice in my house by the local Calumet City Police Department. As I said, he have a disability, which is autism. And we have called and the local police department, based on a recommendation from his social worker that come to our house once a week, and also his doctor, that if he get agitated, have the police, you tell him to go to his quiet place and he's not hearing you, have the police assist you, put him in the ambulance. That's the only reason why the Village of Calumet City Police know my child, Stefan Edward Watts. They have met with him several times, not 10 times like the chief of police went in the news and disposed that information. They have met with Stefan about 4 times. The 4th time, they shot and killed him. There are many times when I called the police. His dad, Stephen Edward Watts, he's in the back right there, will say to me, Donna, stop calling Calumet City Police. They're going to murder Stefan one day. I used to work for the neighboring police department, which is the Dalton Police Station. And I have family members who are police officers, who are soldiers, brothers, nieces and nephews. So therefore, there's law enforcement in my family, and I used to work for them, and still have friends who on the police force, not Calumet City. And we called to get assistance and a non-emergency number to assist us put him in the ambulance. Many times his dad take off with him. And as he would say to me, Donna, you're not from this country, you don't understand. I never got it till about 2 weeks before they murdered him. And I realized I can never call them again. But I'm here today to ask each and every one for you all to understand that there are people with mental disability also that need every one of us help to put a stop to police killing our children, our family, our friends, and call it justifiable homicide. When a child with a disability that they claim that they have 10 times dealing with, which is not so, that they can stand up at my back door shooting at Stefan while he stands at the foot of the basement stairs with his dad. And a non-emergency phone call and 5 officers show up at my house. The very first one that shot Stefan was Robert Eineck, and he was never called to the scene, but he was the first one to show up at my house. And he's the first one that shot Stefan. William Coffey, that shot Stefan Edward Watts in his back while he lay on the ground from the first shot. He was on the ground when William Coffey shot him in the back, and that's the bullet that eventually ended my baby life. I'm not here to ask for justice for Stefan Edward Watts. Stefan's justice is for him to live. That's his justice. And it was taken from him. But I'm here asking for justice for all of us that who is still alive, and our friends and our relatives. Because what happened to my baby could happen to any one of us, especially people of color and Hispanic. Because we are the one that have been suffering brutally more than any other race by the hand of these first responders that's supposed to help us and help our kids. The reason why I'm speaking today, because we have a bill for Stefan Edward Watts But the bill is not really for Stefan because his justice is gone. This justice bill is so it never happened to another human being. Everyone can find it, and the justice for Stefan, one word, is justice for Stefan. Stefan is spelled with S-T-E-P-H-O-N, Watts.com. And this bill is two bills in there, but the one that I'm most passionate about, everyone in the whole United States can vote in this bill. Because we need first responders to be trained to deal with people with disability, whether it's physically or mentally. And so that if they get the training that they're richly needed, because the chief of police stated that these two officers that killed my baby was trained to deal with people with disability, with autism. Not just disability, with autism, the one that my son had. I'm asking everyone to go and sign this petition to have these people be trained. We're trying to get the bill passed. We're working to get it passed here in Illinois, but we want it passed over the whole United States, so all officers and first responders, which is fire, paramedic, and police officer, be trained to deal with people with a disability. Because a person with autism could be in a fire, and if the person who is the fire department don't know how to deal with that person, they will never save that person's life. So they need the training how to deal with people with disability, all autism. The address again is Justice for Stefan Watts. And I'm asking everybody, please just don't do it for the Stefan Edward Watts Powell family. Do it for you. Do it for your friend. Do it for your family. Do it so this never happen. Another person don't have to go through what we are going through, what the Powell Watts family is going through. So I'm asking, this can happen to any one of you all. I never dreamed that this will ever happen to me, especially from a first responders that I trust, especially to my baby that don't even go outside, especially to a child that will live on the block for 10 years and people don't even know him. They know his 16-year-old brother at the time, Stephen, but they never know Stefan because he don't go outside. He only take a cab to school, to Tinley Park, and church, that's it. And I'm asking everybody, don't let this be your family. Don't let this be your loved one. Don't let this be a friend of yours. I'm asking you all, please go to this website and forward the email to everyone. Ask them to do it for themselves and their families and friends. Because autism do not have any color. Autism right now, we don't understand what autism is. But 1 in less than 88 children is diagnosed with autism, and 60% of them are boys. And autism comes in many different forms. My son has Asperger, so he was the vocal one. He was the one that can speak. This is a child that can put a computer back together, that is never worked on computer before our training. This is a child who developed games, how to teach people how to play game and computer. This is a child that his sister, who majored in multimedia web, who is a Geek Squad manager, take out parts of the computer just to try to get him off the computer, including the motherboards and other parts. And Stefan put it back together, find parts from the old computer and put it back together. And this is a child that's no longer here with us. So please don't let this happen to anybody else that you all know. It is not a very good life. It's not easy. It's very hard for me because I work at the Ford plant at 138th, and sometimes those police cars, there are many times, it move me to tears. Because sometimes I can just see it's like my son's eyes is coming towards me and that car. I work for these people with their vehicle. It can happen to you all. Please, help yourself. It's not for Stefan. God bless you all.
Okay, we have heard the request to sign the petition. Ma'am, before you sit, can you tell us again, go to the mic so that everyone can make a note of this. Give us the exact name of the website. I know you said is Stefan. I don't know if it's watts.com or just Stefan, justiceforstefan.com, justiceforstefanwatts.com. So be specific so that we can all move and get the correct website and sign up on the petition and urge others across the United States to sign up for this petition. Yes, ma'am, give it to us.
Okay, the name of the website is Justice for F-O-R, Stefan, S-T-E-P-H-O-N, W-A-T-T-S, which is Watts.com.
One more time.
So it's Justice for Stefan Watts.com.
Thank you. All right, final.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished panelists, I want to congratulate you for giving leadership to this historic event. I'm Kenneth Jones. I live in St. Louis, Missouri, M-I-S-E-R-Y, Missouri. I want to just add some points to the young gentleman who lives in my hometown regarding hotspot policing, and try to help understand the source of these police crimes. We know that police are governed by politicians. In most cities, the municipal political leadership, make those appointments. In St. Louis, it's the mayor of the city of St. Louis. In Chicago, I would imagine it's a similar situation. In New York. And so these politicians appoint police officials, and these officials set policy for the governance of the police department. Now, in St. Louis particularly, the mayor of the city is Francis Slay. Francis Slay is owned by a billionaire by the name of Rex Sinkfield. Like Bloomberg is the governor of New York, or whoever he is, he's owned by Wall Street. So these are the financial interests who own the politicians, or the politricksters, or the polislicksters, or whatever fits your fancy. And they are carrying out the agenda of the wealthy class. The wealthy class has an agenda There's two ways this thing can go. Dimitrov said, capitalism without democratic rights is fascism. And at this point in this country, this country can move in either direction. And we see this taking place where the Tea Party, who Rex Sinkfield in St. Louis, is the leading billionaire who bankrolls these people. They own the mayor, they own the Board of Aldermen, owned because they bought them, and they own the state legislature. They use racism and other divisive ideologies to create division among the working class people because their profit interest is the most critical component of capitalism. I just want to say this, and I'll be through. We may be able to gain small reforms under capitalism, this system, but it is impossible to change the direction of the neo-fascist under capitalism without changing the economic system, because it is the economic system that drives the political system. The economic interests, big business interests, own, right now, own the political system. So if we want real change, we must fight for socialism.
Thank you. All right, brother, Dr. Tate, just
Very
2 minutes.
briefly.
2 minutes.
Right. As the last ED of the National ED of the Alliance, I just have a few observations. Number one, those who want to negotiate with the police is like negotiating with a hungry grizzly bear by yourself. They have different perspectives. If you really want to negotiate with them, that's fine. But have a brickbat there with you so you can talk properly. Now, I don't mean figuratively, all right, or literally, excuse me, but figuratively.
Close the door.
The reason we got the police department in Las Vegas to sit down and at least try to form a civilian control board was because we got 28,000 people who agreed with us, signed a petition, and they had no choice. They had to sit down. Finally, and this is a quote from the Vice Chief of the Reno, Nevada Police Department. Police do not go on the street to serve and protect. There are people who are up on the hill. You are down in the valley. Our job is to keep you in the valley and prevent you from going up on the hill. Keep that in mind when we deal with police. Thank you.
Thank you.